I have wanted this plant so badly for the last 2 years. But here's a question. Is this worth $110? No, it's not. Nearly every popular plant will have its price reduced by 80% in 8 to 18 months. Basically, any hyped up expensive plant that you see on Instagram will eventually have its price reduced to $50. How do I know this? Well, I recorded houseplant prices for over 2 years from every single local online seller that I could find. But don't do that, that's crazy. What you're gonna do is you're gonna use Google Trend data to find out exactly when this price drop is going to start. And it's only gonna take you about 2 or 3 clicks. Now, I don't know if you remember the first time you saw a variegated Monstera adansonii, but if it was in 2020, the internet world and the plant space collectively lost their minds. The plant price when this first arrived, it was $4,000. Yeah, $4,000. That same plant now, at the same size and the same quality from the same website, will run you about $500. And where I am, individual cuttings on Facebook Marketplace can run you anywhere between $100 to $200. You could have predicted this by going to Google Trends, typing in the full name of the plant, switching to worldwide, setting the date range from 2004 to present, and looking for the hump. This hump. This is the price drop hump. I paid $175 for my Monstera pinnati partita. If I could have waited 12 months, I could have paid $50. That's a 70% decrease. Along with looking for the price drop hump, you also have to pay attention to which plants are not immediately selling out from these stores. The boutique plant stores that I was tracking would do something called a plant drop. Basically, they'd shut down their store for a few days or a few hours leading up to this plant drop. Then they'd release all of their stock at exactly the same time, and generally, they'd sell out immediately. But now that the 2020-2021 plant craze is far behind us, you can see that some of these super popular plants aren't selling at those high prices. And that's when you start to see the 80% drop.
I bought this Syngonium aurea for 110 euros in 2021. The same seller now offers them for 35 euros. Same size, same variegation. This equals a 68% decrease in price.
So let's pick a brand new plant. The Monstera Burlmarks Flame, currently being sold at $2,500. During this plant drop, at that price, they are not really selling. So let's look for the hump. Okay, there's a tiny hump, so we're gonna check for sustained popularity within the last 5 years. And other than that huge bump back in 2018, it seems mostly stable with a slight downward trend. But most importantly, you should note that the popularity during the July of 2021 is exactly the same as July 2022. So you know what, I'm gonna call it 80% off that $2,500 price. The next time we see this plant, it should be priced at around $500. Anyways, if I made videos faster, then like we could both follow the predictions and like you could be like, oh, Lee was right. But when I do this, it's like I told you so, and then it's not as good, right? But anyway, I told you so.
I got this allocation Friday for $28, and if I could have just waited 10 months, I would have gotten it for $13. That is a 54% decrease in the price.
For some reason, online, people have this notion that some plant prices will just always be higher, and I don't think that's true. And while there may be some variegated exceptions to this rule, we have to look back to our original unicorn plant, the plant to end all plant collections, the Monstera obliqua Peru. At its height, this plant was being sold as a 3-leaf cutting for $3,250. Most recently, a huge batch was just released on the exact same website for around $500 for a 3-leaf cutting. And not a month later, those 3-leaf cuttings are now on sale for $250. And another 2 weeks after that, they're still not selling. That $3,000 price to that $500 price, do you care to guess the percent drop? 85%. If this plant is not selling at $250, take 80% off that. You know what that price is? $53. If you follow the numbers, the price for the Monstera obliqua Peru will be in the $50 range in 8 to 12 months.
I paid $195 for my Anthurium Bessier AF. If I had waited about 18 more months, I would have paid $80. That's a 58% decrease in price.
I keep running the numbers, but every time a plant meets my 2 criteria, being unsold at plant stores and a sustained popularity on Google Trends, I'm seeing the plant be reduced in price by 90 to 70%. With all that being said, are these price drops good? Good for the consumer who's looking for a new interesting plant to buy at a cheaper price? Absolutely. But is it good for retailers who are trying to maximize their profits? Also yes. Importing plants comes at an extremely high risk. It takes months for them to arrive and be acclimatized and then to be ready to sell. And that's if they arrive alive. I'm sure sellers would much prefer to lower their risks and have higher volumes of plants that they could sell more of and propagate faster for their own stores. I think that's a much safer option than spending 10 grand on 1 or 2 ultra expensive, ultra rare plants that might just come dead on arrival. Is this guy gonna talk about the Spirit Sancti? That plant was like 10 grand. I'm going to talk about the Spirit Sancti, but first I have to call my friend Bushy from TikTok.
That's why I know whenever somebody is like really into rare plants, they're really just into inaccessibility. Hi, my name is Bushy. On all my socials I go by Bushy Lady, but I'm a lady in title only. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a neurodivergent person of color who is non-binary. So if anyone ends up talking shit about me as a result of this video, I would like them to get those things right. So feel free, but like make sure you're right. One day I'm scrolling through my TikTok and ATL Plant Room says that her friend Plant Zaddy is hosting a birthday sale, and one of the plants are Spirit Sancti for $350, I think. This plant, I usually see it like listed for at least $1,000. So I got really excited. $350 is something that I can swing. And I also got that like rush where I'm like, if I don't do anything, I'm gonna lose out on this opportunity and then I'm gonna die with regrets. So I went and bought it. Ta-da! I think it was in moss, but then I switched it to like a chunky aeroid mix because just moss makes me a little bit nervous, personally.
Was it pretty easy to transfer over?
Yes. I think I might have a little bit more of a devil may care attitude when it comes to plant care. There's that saying you shouldn't disturb a plant for months after you've gotten it because of the shock. It's gone through shipping, you should be gentle. But the fact of the matter is I don't know how to take care of a plant if it's just in moss. I will overwater it just because moss holds water in for a very long time. And when I use really chunky draining soil, I can control how much water I put in at a time. So even if I overwater, it's just like flowing straight through. So in the end, the choice I made to repot it was what was best for me as a plant keeper and the plant, and it's doing fine.
One of the things that I usually say is like, if you are comfortable doing something in a certain medium, just keep doing it in that medium, especially if you're getting like a super expensive plant. I noticed that a lot of people want to like change what they're doing all of a sudden into some kind of like premium sounding mix, but if they have no idea how much it retains the water, then that's often how they end up losing their new plant. With this Spiritus, do you find it's like pretty much identical care to any other philodendrons, or are you treating it slightly different?
Well, I'm treating it slightly different in the fact that it is in this case. But like as we talked about, it's not in this case for extra humidity. It's in that case because I spent $350 on it and I don't want to lose it before I had a chance to make any props from pests. Right. That's really the only thing that I'm keeping, that I'm changing up for its care. But it's just honestly like any other philodendron I have. Water it when the water goes below a certain point. Fertilize it when I remember to. That's it.
What do you think made you want to get the Spirit Sancti? Is it the hype surrounding it? Is it how the plant looks? Because there's other long-lobed philodendrons, of course, like the Batapoense, the Bilietiae. What is it about the Spirit Sancti?
So when it comes to like plant collecting or like wanting a plant, for me, I've already kind of like rationalized this and thought about this for a really long time. It always comes down to, I don't have that plant. Other people want that plant. so I should get that plant. And that sounds really terrible, but that, like, I had to, when I first started, like, my plant journey, it was, well, my mom really liked plants, and when she died, I inherited a lot of her plants. But when I started following Plantstagram accounts, that was like a whole different level of plant keeping. And as someone who has ADHD and therefore a lack of dopamine, seeing that and then just getting FOMO, like, fed into this. And so that's kind of what's made me start thinking, like, why do I want rare plants? So to answer your question, why did I want the philodendron Spirit Sancti? It's the rarest plant, right? The plant that no one can have, or that no one has. It's obviously not true that no one can have it because it's being tissue cultured and it's being propped and shared. But it was finally something that was accessible, at least to me at that time. And while that's something I still have to, like, that's still like an impulse that I act on, I still have to recognize that where it comes down, like, where that want comes from isn't really like a healthy place.
Do you think Instagram, when it comes to plants, is at all healthy in its current state? Or even particularly, like, during the pandemic, do you think Instagram was healthy for
big picture?
for someone
I
who
don't
has
think
plants?
Plantstagram, when you look at it for what it is at face value, is a super healthy place for fostering a feeling of real appreciation towards houseplants. Because what I feel is that it's geared more towards the next big thing, or like, this is what you should be consuming to buy your happiness, this is what you actually want in your house, that sort of thing. And it does a really good job. That's what hooked me into, like, the plant world, as it were. Like, I was a plant person, but if you asked me to name any of the plants I had, I'd be like, I don't know. I feel like Instagram, just in general, is really consumer based. Like, it wants you to buy, it wants you to want. But that isn't to say that there isn't some great accounts and there aren't a lot of great plant people on Instagram. I feel like at the start of my plant journey, I experienced Plantstagram, like the big picture of it. But then once I started really interacting with accounts, people had great ideas. People who were veterans in the hobby would share about how it wasn't always like this. Plants weren't $100 or thousands of dollars, like 2 or even 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They would talk about a huge shift in the culture. They would talk about just like newer people coming into the plant community, and then kind of making it more of that consumerist thing. So while I don't think Plantstagram's a healthy place, I am grateful for the people that I met along the journey that really helped shape my new perspective on wanting plants and understanding where that want comes from and trying to change that culture.
I think for me, I do sometimes get caught up in that want of seeing some popular plant on Instagram and then wanting it for myself, but I don't struggle with that impulse control. So for me, I sort of limit myself to one of each type of plant. For me, that doesn't necessarily mean I need one monstera, one philodendron. Sometimes it's like I need a selection of hanging plants, and I only have, like, the shelf that's behind me, I only have, room for like 9 hanging plants. Sometimes it's limiting myself to like one long-lobed philodendron. Sometimes it's limiting myself to like one plant on a table. And I think that sort of helped me really focus on building the best looking of one individual plant that I can. And I'm really trying to focus on getting my plants as large as they can possibly be within the confines of the space that I'm living in. So I think that's sort of what's helped me avoid those traps of Instagram as well.
I like that way of thinking about it. Instead of like families of plants or genesis, you're thinking of places in your home that plants can fit and prioritizing what you want in those spaces.
I did want to ask you specifically about the word rare. Do you think that we're using the word rare properly in the houseplant world? Do you think we need to stop using that word? Do you think it is just another way to create some kind of class system?
Have you heard of pineapple renting?
No, I haven't.
If you could afford a pineapple, which is not native to Europe, you were considered really, really rich, and it was like a flex. Having a pineapple was a flex. So if you had a pineapple, that meant that you could afford whatever it cost to either commission some sort of like ship to go to these lands, pillage, bring back stuff, or you were rich enough to buy from whoever was rich enough to do that. So they would have dinner parties where they would just have pineapples sitting as a centerpiece. Just having the pineapple there meant like, I'm a big deal. This is exclusive. You couldn't afford it. But then there was pineapple renting, where if you had a pineapple or you had a bunch of pineapples, you could rent them out to people who weren't as rich as you so that they could have pineapple parties and pretend that they were like somebody's with pineapples. I really think a lot of us engage with houseplants in the same way. And so because of the subjectivity of the word rare and the fact that everyone defines it in its own way, it allows sellers to create this artificial scarcity or this artificial prestige to something that they have 40 or 60 of in their back room. I really don't think rare is an accurate word for a lot of these plants that we're talking about. And again, my experience is in aeroids. So if something is really, truly rare, that means there isn't a lot of it. The plants that we see on Etsy listed as rare, I don't see them as rare.
Yeah.
And if they're endangered, people might not want to buy them, and people might start being like, well, why are you buying and selling these things? Shouldn't they be somewhere conserved? Shouldn't we be trying to repopulate them back in the wild? And then you get into the whole tissue culture thing where they start being mass produced. My friend Hugo Zephyr on Instagram calls them inaccessible plants. And I don't want to call them high value plants either, because, well, like you saw, the value is constantly changing just based off of trends or accessibility. If something, and that's what's so toxic about it, the second it becomes accessible, it's no longer expensive. And that's why I know whenever somebody is like really into rare plants, they're really just into inaccessibility. They love inaccessibility. They want things to be inaccessible.
I do think you're right about that. I think that we're definitely assigning value to these plants based on other people not having it. And I think if you're getting most of your joy from having something that someone else doesn't have, then you're going to have issues long term if this is a hobby. Because otherwise it's not a hobby, it's just you have a shopping addiction.
Or like you need to flex. And that's not really community-like, is it?
If you want to talk again about why it's important to build your own conception of what community means in terms of having plants.
I hadn't really thought about it until a lot of my content was getting pushback, and a lot of that pushback was, can't we just love each other in this community and, you know, let people enjoy the plant hobby the way that they want to enjoy it? And like, yeah, in theory, that's a great way of thinking about stuff. Let people enjoy things the way they want to enjoy them. But if you're enjoying things purely based off the fact that other people can't have it, isn't that f***ed up? Like, that's not really like a person I want in my community.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the second I got this plant, I don't feel any different. You know, like, I was happy for a second, and now that feeling is gone because my stupid little dopamine deprived brain just needed a little hit. But, like, in the end, I knew, like, the only reason I would get that hit is because, like, oh, I got it. I got the thing. People will try to convince you that, like, I like rare plants because they have a certain type of leaf shape, or they fenestrate, or you have to give them extra special attention. And that's just not true. That's such a weird thing to say. For almost any plant you give me, I'm pretty sure I could think of a lookalike that is considered a common plant that would look similar, that you would have to treat it similar. My specific example, I use like a Monstera Esquilito and a Monstera Adansoni, and they both are fenestrated. They both start with small leaves and get more fenestrated and get bigger leaves. They're both native to the same country, so like the care should theoretically be the same, but you know, people keep their Esquilitos in like an IKEA cabinet, and then they keep their Adansonis out for the cat to start chewing on. So like literally they are the same. One just has a higher value based off the fact that less people have it.
As a counter, someone might say, well, the Esqueleto is more expensive because the leaves get larger faster, but when you take the Obliqua Peru into consideration, like those leaves don't get very big.
No.
Like, yes, it looks cool, but the care, like as you said, is identical to an Adansonii. There's a lot of people who put them in cloches and have their humidity cranked up to 90%, but you don't actually need to do that with the Obliqua. It's funny that the Obliqua Facebook group had tried to stop sales so that they would maintain the price of that plant.
I have their quote because it's the funniest thing. So this is just like a perfect example of artificial scarcity, right? They said, prices are getting too low and we don't want to lower the value of this plant. That's an example of somebody directly valuing a plant based off of its price point. So chop them up and share them. Like that's what this person is literally fighting against. They don't want that to happen because when they start chopping up their plant, they're not going to make $2,000 off their next sale. They're going to make $200, and then months later they'll make $50. But I mean, it grows for free.